Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a new fantasy releases wrap up. The end of the video will actually be a different day, so just a heads up that things will look a little different at the end, but regardless, jumping into it. First up, I'm going to start with Spells for Forgetting. I believe this is technically considered adult fantasy. I do think that this could easily fit into new adult if you personally acknowledge there being a new adult age range, because the characters, while they are early 30s, I thought they behaved somewhat young, and I think some of the ways in which things are delivered to you, some of the behavior of the characters, it reminded me a little bit more of some young adult books. But some of the content is a little bit older, which is why I think it fits in the middle. The setup for this story is we follow two main perspectives, and then we have a lot of other ones sprinkled in. Of the two main perspectives, we have August and Emery. August is a young man who is from this one particular very small town, and he kind of got away and he made a life for himself outside of that small town. However, after his mother has passed away, she has requested that her ashes go back to the place that they are from, and so now he has to confront his past. And then you have Emery, who is a part of that past, and she is somebody who clearly they have a history together, and his arrival shakes everything up, not just for her, but for the entire town. You also very quickly realize that there was a young woman who died years ago, and a lot of the people in the town believe that August was responsible for that young woman's death. This is a hybrid, I would say, of a murder mystery and a paranormal fantasy. I say paranormal fantasy with hesitation because the paranormal elements are not that significant. They play a role in the plot, they play a role in some of the reveals and some of the atmosphere that's created, and I would say that is one thing about this book that I really, really liked, was how vivid of a feeling the author was able to create in her writing style, the way that the setting is described, some of the little details of what's going on definitely creates something that feels not necessarily evil and not quite creepy, but just this strange environment where things don't quite seem normal. So I really like the atmosphere, definitely perfect for the fall season. That said, the paranormal elements, they're there, but very little. So if you're looking for a really interesting paranormal murder mystery, I would say this felt to me more just like a murder mystery. It had all the ingredients too of the small town murder mystery, where everybody in the town is kind of a character, and every time you interact with somebody you're like, what do they know? They seem like they know something. And then you get introduced to someone else and you're like, this person seems too suspicious, so it seems like the red herring. It just seems like this person is supposed to seem over the top. And then you'll meet someone else and you think, that person seems like they might know this other person. Are they in on something? And then of course, as the story is continuing on, you're getting more reveals about the main characters, about some of the other side characters you're introduced to. I did like the trying to piece together everything that was transpiring. And also, this is a fractured timeline. So you have not only these two main perspectives, but you get these other characters that you meet along the way. You occasionally get their perspectives. And then you also get this many days before the girl died. You get this many hours before the girl died. And so I really like those kinds of timelines, especially in this sort of a story. For me, it ended up sadly not being one I absolutely loved, just because it felt like the paranormal elements almost turned into plot conveniences at time. I actually wish the author had leaned a lot more into them, or just not had them and created a really atmospheric setting, but not fantastical whatsoever. And I did find the romance between some of the characters to be a bit melodramatic. It's not the main focus, but it's kind of their main focus. Emery in particular, her personality is basically, I love August and I'm sad he left. That's her personality a little bit. I mean, if you were to ask me to describe anything else about her, I'd be like, she braids her hair sometimes. I didn't really connect with her, and I think in this sort of a book, it's not really necessary. You don't really need to connect to the characters because it's all about the vibe, the aesthetic, the atmosphere, who is responsible for this girl's death. You know, all these other things are more important. But I did feel like for as much as we're in Emery's head and as much as we're in August's head, they think about each other constantly, Emery especially, and at some point I'm like, how'd the girl die? I would still recommend this. I really liked the feel of it. I like this author's writing style. This is the third book of theirs I've tried, and I've always liked this style, but I've never connected to the story, so I might just have to try more of her works. Maybe she's just not the author for me too. That could be. After that, we have Defend the Dawn. This is by Bridget Kemmerer and is the sequel to Defy the Night. Because it's a sequel, I'm gonna more so go into the synopsis for the first one and then give you some of my thoughts about the second one without telling you too much of the plot. So in the first one, we follow this society where a lot of people are very sick and there's only so much of the medicine to treat this sickness to go around. It definitely seems like the upper classes have more access to this medicine than everyone else. And so our main character, Tessa, is somebody who goes out of her way to steal medicine to try and give it to the poor. She has a friend named Wes who joins her in this effort. This is extremely dangerous. There is this prince who is known for being ruthless, and he will punish anybody who is caught doing what Tessa and Wes do. This prince is the other main character besides just Tessa, and after something transpires where Tessa and the prince cross paths, then things kind of take a turn and you start to learn more about the inner workings of the politics and why the prince is so ruthless and why he makes the decisions that he does. I liked in the first one, I've said this a few times about the first book, that there isn't necessarily a simple answer. There's not just, oh, we magically found this cure, so everybody's better now. There's really actually stakes and hard choices to make, and I really enjoyed that about the first one. The second one turns into kind of a seafaring story, and the world opens up a little bit more, and our characters kind of have to question their roles in society, their actions. They have to kind of confront some of how they behave, some of the decisions that they make. And then there are some aspects of the opening up of the world that I found interesting. So I think I will likely continue on and read the third book. I wouldn't say I love any of these characters though, and this isn't a story where I find myself gasping or feeling really emotional over anything really. It's fun, and I definitely think Bridget Kemmerer does a good job of making you want to turn the page, but I wouldn't say I absolutely love this series. I like it, but I don't love it. After that, we have Amari and the Great Game. So another sequel. This is the second book after Amari and the Night Brothers. There will definitely be more books in this series. This second book, I think, did a great job of taking us out of the events of the first one and then leading us into what I think will likely be, hopefully, a lot of books in this series. This is a middle grade series that I think the author could do a lot with. They're funny, they're heartwarming, there's some moments that are really impactful and that hit really hard. So I think there's a lot that this author could do. And I personally don't really get tired of this author's humor. I think some of it is really actually quite funny and cheeky, and other moments are very silly. So a couple of little examples is, one would be where a tiny world building thing, just kind of a throwaway little detail, is at one point there's a mention to a certain kind of coffee that is known for being the absolute best at waking a person up because it tastes so terrible. So just that little throwaway thing, I'm like, oh, that's funny. And it's got those moments all the time of, oh, I liked that. Oh, that was funny. It has that throughout the book. Another cute little thing that happens is there are these magical elevators at this place where Amari is, and one of the elevators is really old, and the elevators talk to the students, and this one is just like a grouchy old person who's like, kids these days have no patience, because he's so much slower than the other elevators. Just silly stuff like that I really like. If you have no idea what this story is about, I'll mention a little bit about the first one, because again, this is a sequel. I don't want to say too much. But the first one, we follow our main character named Amari. Her brother has gone missing, and she is determined to learn more about what happened to him. And then one day, Amari, who is from our own world, discovers that there is a lot of magic in society that most humans don't even know exists. And in learning about this magic, she might also learn a little bit more about what happened to her brother. So she goes to this magical school, she's learning about her powers, and then we kind of go from there. And it has all the great ingredients that you would expect from a middle grade story. You have great friendship in it. You have our main characters having to face things that just aren't fair, and they persevere through it. And when I picked up the second one, something I think that, not just that I think the author does well, but I think that I kind of miss, because I read so much adult fantasy, I feel like there's a genuine skill in making the reader care really quickly. And you do when you read these books. Again, I think it's a skill of the author, but I think it's a skill of middle grade authors also. Because it's a younger audience, because they kind of have to grab your attention quickly, I found that I was very immediately sad when things weren't working out for the character. You know the things that are important to Amari, you know the things that she is striving for, and when those opportunities are taken away, or when there's obstacles put in her way, or even if it's a personal thing that involves a friendship with someone, you are like, oh no. You genuinely are concerned, and you're like, I need this to be resolved. I need happiness for Amari. I know I'm definitely excited for eventually when we get the next book, because of where things leave off. I want to know what happens next. The last two books were both DNFs, but just because they didn't work for me, I didn't want to exclude them because I know a lot of you will probably think they sound really interesting. The first one would be The Liar's Crown. This is one where at the very beginning of the story, I was actually really, really invested, and I thought that the setup was really cool. And then the character ends up leaving the setting that we're seeing at the beginning of the story, and then also kind of leaving behind the plot line that I was interested in. And then it sort of turned into this angsty traveling story where it just felt like it was turning into this build-up between this girl and this mysterious man that kidnapped her. And I found that I think I'm getting to a point where I need that to be done in a way that is very unique and original. Otherwise, it's just starting to feel too repetitive, I guess, for me. And that's not the book's fault, really, because I think I'm just a little burned out right now of those kinds of kind of angstier, mysterious man traveling fantasy stories. But the beginning was so cool, and I can definitely see that we're going to eventually segue into the things that were happening once the traveling starts, coming back into focus with the things that were introduced at the beginning. I just wish the entire book had stayed there. So the setup is that there is this family where every other generation there are two girls born who are twins, and the way that this family handles this situation, because they are royalty, they have one of the twins become the ruler, and they keep the other twin's existence a secret. The twin is going to put themselves in these dangerous situations. That way, the queen can continue to be safe, and this person is just there to be a stand-in for dangerous situations. And I do like that setup. I think it inherently has this unfairness to the character's life. You can see why their entire life is sort of centered around the other person, and I think having that person be your twin sister creates a lot of tension because you love them and you care about them, but also you don't want to live in their shadow, essentially. You want to have your own life, you want to have your own freedom, which I was seeing right away at the beginning. And then there's also some pretty cool magic that was introduced that our character has and her sister does not. So there's all these elements to the story that I was like, oh, this is cool. And I was excited to see the relationship between these two sisters. I was excited to explore the politics because I am a really big fan of political fantasy. And then, like I said before, it kind of segued into this traveling story with this really sexy man that she's like, oh, he kidnapped me, but also he's so good looking. And I'm like, I just am not in the mood, I guess, for this right now. But I know a lot of people love a good angsty relationship. So I think that combined with that world building and setup I was describing before, and if you are a fan of this over here, then this might end up being the perfect book for you. I also think it's a first in a series. The other one I mentioned similarly had a beginning that I was really gripped by. That's maybe not the right way to put it, which will make sense once I start describing it. So the book would be Blood Scion. This one is very, very heavy. So the author does kind of give a note at the beginning to be aware of what you're going to be reading about. Some of it involves child soldiers and the way that young people or just individuals who are currently facing occupation are mistreated and they have very little freedom and choice in their lives. So you see immediately in the opening scene how this is affecting the main character. You're seeing that sense of helplessness for the whole first exposition sort of a part of the story. And the relationship between our main character and her grandfather, I was actually really, really sad seeing the way that she cares so much about him. But then there's this draft that as soon as you turn 15, you are likely to be drafted. And if you try to run, they will harm your family members. And so our main character doesn't want to pursue that path in the event of being drafted. But her grandfather also, he's the only one really there for her, and he loves her, and he doesn't want something to happen to her. So you're seeing this relationship at the beginning that I completely understand why our main character feels that sense of hopelessness and helplessness. You're also seeing how everything that has happened is affecting her friends, and their backstories were also really, really tragic, and I think quite realistic, and the kinds of ways in which they respond to them emotionally, I thought was as well realistic. I think where it lost me a little bit is the book eventually gets to a point where you're starting to see a little bit more about the military, and their tactics were, in my opinion, quite unrealistic. It felt definitely shocking, and the things that were happening were awful, and it was very high stakes, fast paced sort of a feeling that I can see a lot of people wanting to turn the page. But I think because the beginning felt so rooted in the actual trauma associated with an occupied group of people, with a military that has been fed propaganda and believes that their occupation is justified, and then also just how this main character is dealing with this trauma, how sometimes they completely ignore it, they compartmentalize, all those things, they were so realistic, and I think probably speak to that sort of a situation in our own lives. But then some of the tactics in the military, like I said, it was so unrealistic to me, and I want to give examples, but I also don't want to spoil it. So I'll have a timestamp if you want to skip ahead. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So first, as soon as the individuals are brought into the military, they kind of test their loyalty, and they make them kill a person that they likely care very much about. And so that it was presented as this thing that nobody knew was coming, but I also kind of thought it was a bit of a plot hole because there have been people who were drafted that our main character knew, and I feel like eyebrows would have been raised if every time somebody was drafted, somebody else was taken from that person's life as well. I just felt like, well, wouldn't we all kind of notice that every time someone's drafted, there's other people that end up gone as well? And then after that, once they're put into their squads, they have to kind of get the weaklings out of the squads. And so it's put on their shoulders by their commanders to basically go for it, kill each other if you have to. And actually, I would rather have one person in this squad who's a ruthless killer than have 10 people who are weaklings. Coming out of the somewhat spoilery things now, it ended up feeling as if it was trying to repeatedly shock me and top the last shocking thing. I can see it being something a lot of people do really like, and they are really continuously gripped by. And I also think it is young adult, and even though it has these really, really heavy things, I can see somebody who likes that faster pace. They don't really want to slow down. They don't care necessarily about how realistic it is all the time. They just want to keep going. I can completely see being swept up in this kind of a story. There are, of course, plenty of stories that I like that are not remotely realistic, but they're still engaging and, in this case, not fun, but there are times that it can be really exciting and fun as well. So it didn't work for me in this case, but I would still say if it sounds interesting, definitely give it a try. That's it for this new releases wrap up. If you read any of these, let me know your thoughts on them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later.